everyone. So this is a mum's story, something that I feel doesn't get spoke about enough. My name's Gemma. I'm a mum to 4 beautiful children. I was diagnosed in 2013 with thyroid cancer while I was at university. I spent the next 6 years getting better and trying to rebuild my career. In November 2019, I was offered my dream job and life couldn't get better. So that's my children. This was just before my son was diagnosed with osteosarcoma. Two weeks into my new job, Ellis started to complain about knee pain. I took him to the minor injuries unit on 2 separate occasions, only to be told it was growing pains or sports related. The only sports that Ellis played was FIFA on the Xbox. He was fobbed off with exercises and was refused an X-ray despite me asking both times. I was becoming more and more concerned and annoyed, so I booked an emergency appointment at the GP for the Monday after work and was told if he can wait until then, it wasn't an emergency. He was off school as the pain was so bad, but I was still settling into my new job, so I didn't want to take time off. The GP rolled her eyes at me and told me off again, and also said it's sports related. I pushed for an X-ray and she gave me one to shut me up. Seeing as this was a rare occasion, Ellis being off of his Xbox, I decided to go straight to the hospital for the X-ray. I had my girls with me, so he had to go in on his own. I didn't see his X-ray, and I still haven't. 8:30 the next morning, I went to work and had a phone call from the GP, nervous and stuttering. She told me he had been referred to London Sarcoma Service. She hung up, and 5 minutes later, she phoned back to ask if I had any questions. So I asked to see her face to face. Within hours, myself and Ellis's dad were sat in her office, and she explained that he was being referred just as a precaution. No cancer was ever mentioned. I got back to the car in the car park, and the phone rang again, and it was the London Sarcoma Service. The appointment was in 2 days in London, exactly 1 week before Christmas. Over the next few weeks, we spent over £500 in travel to and from London for tests and appointments. He was booked in for a biopsy on Christmas Eve. I had to choose between going with Ellis to the hospital or having Christmas Eve with my girls. I had to choose between what I needed to do, not what I wanted to do. I remember the doctor asking Ellis at the biopsy if he knew he was there, and he turned around at 12 years old and said, "I've got bone cancer." This is the first time I've ever heard him say the word. He was officially diagnosed 12 days later, and chemo started 20 days from the first GP appointment. I made the choice not to tell the girls anything until after Christmas. I didn't know if this was the last one we would all have together. I sat New Year's Eve and cried. I was terrified. My youngest was 4, and she asked me, "Is he going to die, Mummy?" I said, "I don't know." I knew I couldn't lie to her, because if he died, I would have lied. So I simply said the doctors would do everything they can to make sure it doesn't happen. We cried together, but we also laughed together too. Ellis said, "What's the point in being scared? It won't change anything." So we lived by that. Life as an oncology mum is hard. You become a nurse. You have no privacy, no space to talk on the phone or to collect your thoughts. You're on call 24/7. You're thrown into a lonely world with so much responsibility. I found a little area by the lifts outside the ward where I would go and sit when Ellis was sleeping. I'd watch the people below going about their day, feeling jealous and angry. I felt trapped. I joined Facebook support groups to find people who understood. One mum whose son was a month ahead of Ellis took me under her wing and explained everything. When the days were hard, we would message each other. We both understood like no one else even tried to. Messages like, "Do you feel?" or just a simple, "I know you'll get it." Her and her family live around 200 miles away from me, but for many months during lockdown were the closest people to me. We finally met up in person this Easter, after 2 years of the very first text. Now Victoria and Damo are friends for life, and they're here today. Two months into chemo, COVID hit. Ellis's operation was the 17th of March 2020. He was due to stay in hospital for 10 days, but he was sent home after 4 as lockdown hit. He had no physio, no support. We had no paracetamol at home because the shops had sold out, so I had to put a desperate plea on Facebook for some. Nurses in the ward were speculating what was going to happen. One nurse told me that if you were in London, you'd be stuck there for 6 months. We didn't know if chemo would continue. We didn't know if hospitals would shut. Would he die? We had to shield for 6 months, which meant at the beginning, no shops, no essentials, no garden, and we were even told right at the beginning, don't open your windows. Chemo started, but we were moved to Great Ormond Street, and all our newfound safety had gone. They introduced the 1 parent per child and no siblings. Four months of shielding and going it alone, Ellis tested positive for COVID on the 4th of July 2020 on a routine pre-assessment test. We had been nowhere. We arrived at the local hospital at 1 p.m, and I was so worried I hadn't eaten anything. His blood pressure plummeted dangerously low. They tried to insert an art line and failed 3 times, and there was blood everywhere. Ellis cried hysterically. "Mum, tell her to stop," he said. It broke my heart. I asked her to stop. Then I cried too and fainted. I sat outside the room and was given water and left. No one even checked on me. When I went back in, he wasn't crying, but he was distraught. It turns out Ellis had sepsis as well as COVID. He was blue lighted to Great Ormond Street Intensive Care. We got there around 1 a.m. I still hadn't eaten a thing. He was wheeled into a makeshift paediatric intensive care ward. There were red warning signs everywhere saying, "Do not enter, COVID." Great Ormond Street was empty. The nurse came up to me and said, "I'll get your room key." And I said, "Sorry." She said, "You can't stay here. You have to stay in our parent unit up the road." I went into Ellis and pretended I was okay and said I had to go. He was okay and just wanted to sleep. At this point, it was about 2 a.m. It was pitch black. I had no battery on my phone. I had a suitcase, and I was stood in the middle of the road and just cried. I finally found the building, and it was derelict and really scary. I checked in, and it was just me in the building, apart from 3 burly security guards. I found my way to my room, walking past all of the boarded-off communal areas, closed the door and just cried. I don't know if you can see, but this was my room. I stayed awake until morning. Back then, if you had COVID positive in your household, it meant you had to isolate and you were shielded and you couldn't go out. I asked the nurse what I could do, and she said anything and showed me the way to Tesco's. We were there for 2 nights and then 2 nights back in the local. To me, this is the most important part and the reason I wanted to be here today. It's the bits that nobody talks about. So it's the no sleep and the machines beeping. I was on high alert, listening in case he cried or if he was sick, collecting his wee and taking it to the sluice room, watching out for nurses, medications. You end up feeling hysterical. You don't have a sense of day or night. I felt anger, guilt, and to blame. Was it my fault? Could I have done something different? Mums should protect their children, and I couldn't. I felt like I failed. Why him? Why my beautiful, funny boy? Steroid rage. Ellis was nasty. He was angry, horrible to me. My sweet boy seemed possessed, taking it out on me, lovely to the nurses, and then horrible when they'd gone. I felt resentment, but this took me a long time to acknowledge and accept, and actually, it's pretty normal. Not having time for a breakdown. I went straight from hospital mum, to homeschooling, making sure the girls were dealing with everything, answering questions, reassuring. Some days I didn't want to get out of bed. People used to say to me, "You're so brave," but I didn't have a choice. Being brave is a choice, and I certainly wish I didn't have to be. My marriage broke down. Months of having to face everything alone took its toll on my marriage. Not having a name, I was mum. I was Ellis's mum. I was the mum whose kid had cancer. I was the poor mum. Other mums were Tay's mum, Ollie's mum, or Dom's mum. I just wanted you to say my name. The end, although it's not really. The anxiety of each scan. We're 3 years down the line, and I just sat there in the audience, and Ellis texted me saying, "I think I've got a chest infection, my chest hurts." Learning how to be a mum again. No bubble wrap. Ellis had heart failure due to the chemo, and he's now 15 and refusing to take his heart medication. I'm trying to learn to live with the fact that it's his life and his leg. He comes home from school and tells me about how he's played football and fallen over. Rebuilding relationships with my children. I missed out on nearly a year of their lives. Feeling like nobody cares anymore. No safety net of the wards, no nurses. Everyone else thinks it's over. Appointments. Nearly 3 years later, and I've had 3 appointments in the space of a month. Siblings' mental health. I'm still fighting for support for all 3 of my girls. It's really hard. Learning to live with trauma. My youngest has a phobia of hospitals. She's worried at each checkup, worried she will get cancer. She says things to me like, "My leg hurts. Do I have cancer like Ellis? Will I have to have that yucky chemo that would make me bald?" I'm still spending about £150 a time on the train, or 2 or 3 hours away in a car, but I don't have a choice. My destination to being better. I've turned London into my happy place. I've revisited lots, sat up and looked up at UCLH, retraced steps, and learnt to override bad memories and replace with good. I've had counselling on and off for 2 years and realised it's really important to talk. I've asked for help, which is something that I found hard. Ellis was left after chemo with no physio. He was in a wheelchair due to the heart failure. I made a Facebook plea for private physio recommendations, and an old school friend, a PE teacher at local secondary school, offered to work with Ellis by helping him with strengthening exercises. From the September to the January, Ellis was out of his wheelchair and walking, solely from the help of this friend. My birthday came at the end of January, and I had a card, and he asked me out for dinner. Raising awareness. In 2020, I did a skydive. In 2021, I did a 25k trek. In 2022, I did a 25-kilometre trek. And I've just signed up in 2023 to do a walking marathon. I'm still not 100%, and I may never be, but I'm learning to know that that's okay. I've published a book for siblings of those with cancer and the importance of talking about your worries. I've donated copies to schools, to Maggie's Centre in London, a holiday retreat for families affected by cancer, and Ellis's ward at UCLH in T11 North. I even sneaked one onto the shelf in the Macmillan Centre, where he has his appointments. And that's us now.